review what happened one day when we were meeting about this event this morning. I received a text from my daughter saying, "I hate school. I can't stop crying." And I asked why. "Just some idiots on the bus calling me names." What kind of names? Dumb whore. "Don't let them bother you. You know they're only doing it to get under your skin." "I just hate it so much, Mom. I don't know why they're doing it. That's why I cut school."
You know, there are two places that a child should feel safe. In their home, along with their family, and in our schools. And as you've just heard, that's not always the case. Sexual harassment is a pervasive problem that hinders equity in education at every level of our nation's schools. Our new report, Crossing the Line, Sexual Harassment at School, presents new evidence on sexual harassment, examining it as reported in a nationwide survey of students in grades 7 through 12, conducted as recently as May and June of this year. The survey confirms that sexual harassment is a damaging part of school culture, affecting the educational experiences of millions of students, especially girls.
So focusing on school year 2010-2011, on that one school year, the survey asked students about their experiences. It asked them about their reactions. It asked them about the effect of these experiences on them. We used a broad definition of sexual harassment as any kind of unwanted sexual conduct. So that's a broad sweep. And we did that so we could capture all of the kinds of behaviors that could have a negative effect on individuals, regardless of whether they're illegal or not. So we're looking all the way to the right, the experienced sexual harassment online. We see about 30% of students, or a little under a third, have experienced this form of harassment in the last school year. About 44%, looking at the middle set of bars and the purple one there, that's any kind of in-person harassment. That might be verbal, that might be physical. And then we looked at any kind of harassment, and there we see that it's about a half, 48% of students experience some form of harassment. The reason we care is because it affects so many students. Yes, there are students who shrug off these kinds of experiences, but a majority, about 87%, have a negative effect of some kind. So I guess our main findings from the report that I want to leave you with before I turn it over to our distinguished panel is that sexual harassment is common in grades 7 through 12. And it has a negative effect on both boys and girls, ranging from physical symptoms to educational impacts.
It's so unusual for teachers to be invited to be a part of conversations like this, and I think it's absolutely critical that we sit literally at the table to be a part of these kinds of discussions, because we're a part of making change every single day. So what I want to kind of lift up from the report that I really found as connecting to my own work is one of the promising practices, which was the suggestion that bringing women's and gender studies curricula into the classroom is a very kind of powerful way to address not only sexual harassment, but all forms of gender-based violence along different categories of oppression. Another part of the AAUW report that I really appreciated was the fact that it highlighted intersectionality. And what I mean by that is that it looks at issues of racism, classism, sexism as informing sexist and gender-based violence such as sexual harassment. And that's such an important part of what I do as a classroom teacher is I teach students exactly that kind of language in kind of intersectional theory. We do a whole range of readings on that so they can understand and have the language to name what it is that they're feeling on a daily basis, their daily lived experiences, as well as make the change that will follow up on addressing those issues. Every year that I've taught a course on women's and gender studies, it's absolutely important that boys be a part of the conversation, and I feel lucky that the boys who have been a part of this class feel themselves that they're male allies in the work working against sexual harassment.
In our Men of Strength Club, we have a curriculum for our middle school young men and a curriculum for our high school young men, and we have conversations around this difficult topic of masculinity. What does it mean to be a man in our society? How does a man walk, talk? How is he supposed to dress? How is he supposed to view women, treat women? Interesting conversations throughout the program year, if you can imagine, with middle school young men as well as high school age young men. I've worked with young people for different nonprofit organizations for almost 16 years now, professionally. If you want to throw in college, it's 20 years. And the one thing that I'm adamant about is the protection and the safety and well-being of young people. And to hear your voice in this report to say that the young people, the students said a few things that they suggest that they wanted and needed were in-class discussions around sexual harassment, teacher and staff report, and resources, be it online or handouts. You know, do men show emotions? Are men supposed to cry? Is it okay for a man to cry? And that turns into a 20 to 25 minute debate, because the guys are trying to come up with a list of when it is okay for a man to cry and when it's not okay for a man to cry. And I'm not exaggerating. It takes about 20, 25 minutes for them to come up with a list. However, when I ask them, when is it okay for a woman to cry? Whenever. Conversation's done. Boys aren't telling anyone, any adult, when they have been sexually harassed. That was not surprising to me. If a young man is being called gay, in his mind, if he tells an adult, now he's even more gay, he's a punk, he's soft, he doesn't want to tell, he's going to hold on to all of that. He's going to internalize all of that. And unfortunately, going back to the report, it states that young people who sexually harassed have been sexually harassed themselves.
One of the things that we've really missed the boat about is that we communicate to young people as if these things are separate, whole and distinct and separate issues of bullying, sexual harassment, any kind of power, using power to dominate somebody via gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, whatever it is. And so it's a difficult thing that we're doing for young people, because our job as adults is to create bridges for them to critically think through ways that people treat each other with injustice, the way in which we dominate each other, the way in which we are silent in the face of injustice. And so we have actually, one of the things that's happened because of the tremendous attention, and yes, it is well served, and yes, it's important, but the tremendous attention that's put on bullying is that we think of sexual harassment as somehow extremely different and something that we don't need to pay as much attention to. I also believe that for adults, that sexual harassment is thought of as normalized behavior, right, in high schools. And one of the things that we as adults need to say, but frankly young people need to say to adults a lot, is just because it happens every day doesn't make it right. So we've got to be honest that some adults are terrible at being able to react to children when they come forward about sexual harassment. And so when we say, go talk to an adult, and then we're surprised that young people say, no, I don't really want to do that, that's because it is possible that they've had an experience that makes them think, I don't want to talk to an adult. It makes the situation worse. Or I've seen a young person in my school be dominated or harassed by a teacher or by an administrator. I've seen injustice in my school at the hands of adults. And so why would I come forward? Or it's really scary to come forward. And it makes sense. And as adults, one of the things I think we really struggle with is we say as a way to justify this, well, kids have a code of silence. So, then that is a really difficult thing to break. Well, that code of silence is there in some ways because we have not been honest enough with ourselves about what we do or do not do to be credible role models and credible authority figures for young people, that if they're going to come forward and talk to us about this, we know what to do. But I think that we would love to talk about, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think we would love to talk about what it is that makes it so difficult for boys to complain so that they remain silent, because we do not often give boys even the language to be able to speak about the things that are happening to them.
So in our 2009 National School Climate Survey, we found that over 60% of LGBT students felt unsafe in schools because of their sexual orientation, and over 40% felt unsafe because of how they expressed their gender. So we also found staggeringly high rates of verbal and physical harassment and abuse because of sexual orientation and gender expression. LGBT students are definitely negatively affected by these constant sexual harassment, abuse, and bullying, showing higher levels of absenteeism, lower educational aspirations and achievement, and poor psychological well-being. About a third of students missed class or days of school in the past month during the survey. Abused students had about half a grade lower in GPA, and they had increased levels of depression, anxiety, and lower self-esteem.
We found that sexual harassment continues to be a very widespread problem and a normalized problem in our middle and high schools across the country. And it's really one that negatively impacts the educational experiences of millions of students. And that's why we're all here today, because we all care about that. Everyone can help address and prevent sexual harassment, whether you're in the school community itself or whether you're an outside community member who's concerned about these issues. Some of their top recommendations were to create a way for them to anonymously report the problems. Over half of the students wanted assurance that their complaints will be taken seriously and that students who harass will be penalized. 40% of students wanted there to be a designated person at school to whom they could report. And under Title IX of the Education Amendment of 1972, it would be very logical for all schools to have a Title IX coordinator for them to turn to. Then on the education side, which to me is really so important, nearly a third of the students wanted in-class discussions on the topic. A fourth recommended that schools hold workshops on sexual harassment. And nearly 1/4 said that they would like to see online resources about sexual harassment. Again, as the different panelists said, so many students aren't getting this information in the schools right now, and this could be an important first step. The last chapter, it totally focuses on recommendations, and it's broken out. What can administrators do? What can teachers do? Guidance counselors? What can parents of students do? And other concerned adults? What can students themselves do? And what can our community groups do? And there are also 4 promising practices. So as with every AAUW research report, crossing the line only has impact if people read it and if they know the data and get that information. So the report is available online for free, and people can order copies, additional print copies from Shop AAUW, which is accessible from our website, aauw.org.